As promised, here we are at the last main station on the Underground Railroad, Mount Gilead AME Church, founded in 1822 by people who escaped slavery, primarily in places like Delaware and Maryland, made it into Pennsylvania, and for whatever reason did not want to make the long trek up to northern parts of New York or into Canada. Thought that they could be safe here and hide out in this community. I'm in Buckingham Township, which is in Bucks County, not far from right where the Delaware River is. In fact, you've all heard the story of George Washington and the troops crossing over the Delaware and that famous scene in the Revolutionary War. We're not far from that. So we sit up pretty high on this mountain. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit about this place today. I've got some great drone footage as well, thanks to the new drone that we're using as well. But I'm following a couple of particular books. Now, so there's a lot of car traffic that passes this little road, by the way, so you get a bunch of that noise in the background periodically, even big trucks. And I'll actually show you the road. It's very, very narrow. But this book is really helpful. They're both by Charles Blockson. I've got others as well, but Blockson was my guy. If you know anything about Philly and his collection at Temple University, he was a star college athlete way back in the day, could have played in the NFL, and chose instead to focus on intellectual pursuits. And so this is the Underground Railroad by Charles Blockson. It's the Hippocrene Guide to the Underground Railroad. So in here, you'll find various destinations and information, like this one here, Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania, the Maulsby House, or also in Plymouth Meeting, Abolition Hall. I mean, and he has this is for all over the country. Michigan is in here, Illinois, New Hampshire. This is a really, really good book. You can also consult this one, which is more narrow to my search for leading up to the election, because this is the election special of Black History on Twos. So this is the Underground Railroad in Pennsylvania, also by Blockson, and this goes county by county. And so today, focusing on Bucks County. Now, like I said, this is the election edition because a lot of people, you know, I hear a lot of times, especially with young Black voters, a type of apathy that really disturbs and concerns me. Now, personally, I have my preference about who to vote for, and you know, we all have our own choices. But I think that when you consider the history of America and the history of Black people in particular, and the ways in which rights, especially voting, were denied, the type of sacrifice that people like those who attended this church went through to ensure that one day people would have the right to vote, that the very least that every Black person can do is to at least show up. Now, I mean, you can actually show up and just vote present. You don't want to vote for anybody there, but you showed up to the polling place, you requested a mail-in ballot, you did whatever it was, but you honored these ancestors that even give you the right now to say, I don't want to vote. I mean, that in and of itself is power to even decide that you don't want to vote for somebody. So the least we can do is honor their sacrifice. And I know people are like, oh man, you got to give me a better reason than that. Well, let me just say this. If you die for something that you believe in, that you think is going to help other people in the future, how would you feel if somebody comes along 100 years later and says, you got to give me a better excuse than that? I mean, if that's the case, what was the sacrifice for? So no, actually don't need a better excuse than that. So show up and cast your vote. And yes, maybe all you have are trash candidates. If that's your opinion, I don't happen to believe that, but if that's your opinion, then again, show up and just mark present or vote for the things that you believe in. So, all right, get off that soapbox real quick. Let me just tell you, here are a few of the places on the Underground Railroad in Bucks County alone. Now this blows my mind because if you are a motorcycle rider, then you already know that rolling through Bucks County is one of the best places to ride your motorcycle. The back roads, Route 32, River Road, rolling up from New Hope up to Easton, which becomes 611. I mean, I'm just telling you, there are just tons of places. You get off on any road and you can ride through. But what has blown my mind is that many of the places that I love to ride, I've discovered are actually Underground Railroad sites. So of course, Buckingham, where I am right now, which is right off of 263 and 202, Hollow King Road, I'm telling you, if you are a rider and you've been up here, you have passed it 1,000 times. It's about a mile or two up off of the road. You can also hit it the back way off of River Road as well. But think about these places: Bensalem, Quakertown, Yardley, Warminster, Doylestown, the Delaware Lehigh Canal. So you're riding up River Road and you see that little bitty canal on in between Route 32 and the Delaware River. That little canal was meant to actually transact a lot of business. So people were also put in that canal, and they were enabled to escape that way as well. Bristol, Langhorne, Newtown. I think I said Bensalem, but it's worth saying again because Bensalem is also a place where we have a very historic AME church. Perkasie, Wrightstown, Pineville, all these little places just in Bucks County were places and pockets where the Underground Railroad was at work. Now, I know we tell the story often that this was, about like all white Quakers and they ran the Underground Railroad and this is what they did for black people. Without question, Quakers were a part and an integral part of the Underground Railroad, as were other white Americans who often put themselves, their property, their possessions, and even their freedom at stake to help black people escape slavery. So without question, absolutely, without the assistance of whites, as you're going to hear in this story here today, the Underground Railroad, as we know it and remember it, may not have been as successful. But you cannot take away the determination of the people who were actually here, who were, number one, who had fought to get themselves free and escape slavery, and then risked it again by helping other black people get through. Man, I tell you, we're going to go at some point, hopefully in the next week, to Christiana, which is near Lancaster. You should start reading up on that now, the Christiana Revolt, because some of you may want to do that ride with me. That is just like, I'm telling you, they say it was a precursor to the Civil War and a precursor to John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, but just not as well known. And so, but again, I want to talk about the self-determination of black people. This was an AME church. Shout out to the community in Buckingham that has taken care of this building and preserved it after the AME Church decommissioned it some years ago. It's no longer our building, but this community cares for it and they have regular services. As the new historiographer of the AME Church, one of the things I would love to do is to actually come here and lead a group of us to have a worship service here on an annual basis to remember our ancestors. But this was a community that was founded in 1822. At the same time that Bishop Richard Allen was alive. Richard Allen lived to 1831. So it is conceivable that Bishop Richard Allen was here at this building, to meet this congregation. They did not have their first building until the 1830s after his death, but they were a congregation just without a building. You know that's possible. All right. Then the second building was built in the 1850s. That's the building that is sitting behind me that replaced the log cabin. But this independent free black group of people stayed here because, as you can see on some of the drone footage, this sits up on a mountain. It gave them a tremendous advantage to actually see slave catchers who were coming. All right. Now, what you have to remember is this, that once people crossed into Pennsylvania and they were free, that did not necessarily mean that they would remain so. There were two Fugitive Slave Acts, the first in the 1790s that really wasn't enforced as much. But by 1850, the second and more stringent one happened. Now, this is, again, why I say voting is critical. Because the Fugitive Slave Act, which gave slaveholders the power to come into the North and extradite people who were accused. A lot of times, people were not even the people they were looking for, but it was like that'll do. They're close enough, take them, I want to replace my property. So the Fugitive Slave Act allowed them to come and snatch black people, kidnap them, and take them back into slavery or into slavery. Now, this did not fall from the sky, folks. This was an act of Congress signed by a president. So people who had the right to vote voted for this to happen. They voted for lawmakers to go to Congress, and this is the law that they came back with, this great compromise in 1850 that basically once again sold black people out. As a result, what would occur often is that enslaved people would make it to Pennsylvania, they'd make it to New Jersey, they'd make it to New York, and the slave catchers would come in and you wouldn't know who they were and just pounce on people, grab them, and then take them back. Or they'd go to the local federal authority and get a warrant and go to your job, go to your home, go to your church and arrest you and then take you back after a short trial, and then you were back into slavery. So there was always a fear that you were not really free until you made it to Canada. Canada at one time would also extradite people, but it became much more difficult to extradite from Canada because of public pressure there and by abolitionists. So in fact, that's why black folk called Canada heaven. So I'm going to walk around a little bit so we can actually see some of this while I continue talking about this story. And again, remember, this is Black History on Tues. All right, so today we're riding the 2024 Road Glide fitted out with the red, black, and green flag. And oh, this is interesting too. I just want to show you this because you might not even believe this. But this building is so old, they still have the outhouse. So the outhouse is still here, and that's how folk would use the restroom up at Mount Gilead AME Church. Now, as I was saying, the reason that Mount Gilead was here in this position is for a couple of reasons. One is that it provided great natural cover and defense against the slave holders. It sits high up on a mountain. Buckingham Mountain is not an exaggeration. I mean, it's not like the Sierra Nevadas or the Appalachians, but in Bucks County, it kind of feels like you're on a mountain. So they could actually see slaveholders coming from quite a distance, and they could rally each other and let them know. It was also surrounded by a number of Quaker abolitionists who were down with the cause and were not about that life. And so those Quakers were making sure that their black neighbors were safe. So speaking of all of that, the most famous story that happened here, and there were a number of famous members here, Negro League players who are buried here in the cemetery, colored troops from the Civil War, other war veterans from other wars as well. But the most notable story here, and you can find this anywhere, is about a brother named Big Ben, Big Ben Jones, who stood, I think, 6'8", 6'10", and unfortunately for him, his height also meant that he stood out. And so people who were looking for him from where he escaped were able to quickly find him, probably because of his description. They made their way up here in the 1850s to Buckingham, and they jumped on him while he was out plowing. He was out doing his work and he was plowing, and they beat him so bad that his injuries, from what I continue to read, stayed with him for almost the rest of his life. So Big Ben, who fought to defend himself and almost lost his life, was arrested by his former owner and taken to Baltimore, where he was put in the prison there, downtown Baltimore. In fact, it's where I think the Ravens or the Baltimore Orioles play right now, but it's right downtown. The location doesn't exist anymore. He was put there and thought for, I'm sure, while he was there all those days, that that was the end. But the community here, black folk took the money they had, white abolitionists put in with it, and they gave the money to a couple of the white members of the community who went down to Baltimore, and they didn't bail him out, because that was not the case. They had to buy him. So they purchased him and then granted him his freedom and helped him get back here. He lived out the rest of his life in freedom. But again, he was so beaten and so badly beaten that it's, hard to even say what type of quality life he had as a result of that. And so I just want you to understand, I mean, when you hear these stories and when you see these places and you remember what black people had to do to get free, I just don't understand people today who talk about things like, I don't think I'm going to vote, or I don't know that voting is really necessary. Do you not understand that we wouldn't have what we have today if not for people like that, who sacrificed, who gave everything to make sure that we could be free? I mean, like, this is not a joke, and it's not an exaggeration. And, you know, some people say like, oh man, you know, why you sweating us like that? Well, we're sweating you like that because of the sacrifices that people made. I mean, people put everything on the line for us. And the very least that we can do is take some time. I mean, nowadays voting is so easy in most places, like in Pennsylvania, you can just go online on your phone, apply for a ballot, and they will send it to you in the mail. You have to, you know, go through all the pain and suffering of spending 5 minutes filling out the application, filling out your ballot. And oh my God, yes, you've got to actually seal it and then take it to a place where you can mail it back. I know, it's so torturous. It's almost as bad as, I don't know, like running for your life from Maryland and then, you know, not letting the dogs catch you, evading slave catchers, and then living in perpetual fear until the end of the Civil War truly actually let black folk free before we fell back into Jim Crow, the second version of that. I know. So I know that, you know, going through the hassle of voting is probably as difficult as that. Yeah, of course, you know, I'm being sarcastic. So you have no excuse. And like I said at the outset, even if you don't want to vote for anybody on the ballot, then don't. Just show up. Vote present. And at least honor the fact that they made that possible for you. All right? So this is, again, Mount Gilead AME Church. And, man, look at that up there. That's amazing. Got the cornerstone up on the top. And got a little historical badge here as well. So, all right, hope that inspires somebody to go out and to get others. I'm going to be hitting these places up throughout the election. Yeah, that little road I was talking about, as I mentioned to you, is very narrow. I don't know where they parked their cars in the 1800s. Well, I mean, their horses and buggies. I guess they probably walked to church. It was a neighborhood church after all. All right, folks, I'm out.